Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing a wrap-up of my July monthly priority, which was focusing on the Hugo Awards and recent works in science fiction and fantasy. If you're not familiar with my monthly priorities, I'll link that down below, but basically what I'm going to do today is wrap up, talk about some of the books that I read for this priority, some of the themes that I saw across the different books, and then recommend a couple of my favorites to you. So first, let me talk about the books that I read for my priority this month. And actually, I'm going to start with the books that I did not read for my priority this month because I ended up DNFing quite a few of them. So of the 7 books that I put on my TBR, I DNF'd 3 of them. I also finished 2 of them, and then I read 2 others, which I'm counting as part of this priority. So let me talk about the DNFs first. So first, I DNF'd Middlegame by Seanan and McGuire. This is a kind of contemporary fantasy focusing on alchemy. And in this, we have some alchemists who want to basically have the power to create and change the world. So they take the alchemist doctrine and split it, embody it in 2 twins, Roger and Dodger, where one of them has sort of this doctrine of math and the other has the doctrine of language, and they have great powers. So this book had a lot of interesting aspects to it, but I ended up DNFing it because I just wasn't getting into it, and especially the main kind of alchemist who was trying to do these things was very much a mustache twirling kind of evil guy. So I didn't get so into it, but I think there's a lot of people who love this book, and it's interesting that it uses alchemy. Next, I DNF'd The City in the Middle of the Night by Charlie Jane Anders. This is a science fiction story that takes place on another planet that humans have colonized, but it is a tidally locked planet, which means that half of the planet is always in intense sunlight and the other half is always in freezing darkness. There are a couple of cities that are built on the edge, kind of the twilight between the two. And we follow some characters who are dealing with the kind of governments that exist in these different cities. There's a lot in this that was really cool in terms of world building, in terms of the alien life that lives on this planet, in terms of sort of the political issues that are addressed, but it is very much an emotional story that is focusing on a relationship between 2 women that is very tumultuous. And I find that that kind of extreme versions of emotions is a little bit melodramatic for me, so it didn't work for me, but I do think that the ideas in the world building are very cool, so if you like that kind of extreme emotion, this could work for you. And lastly, I DNF'd Escaping Exodus by Nicky Drayden, which I was very sad to DNF because it was such a cool book, but it had way too much body horror for me. So this book is one where humanity has evolved very, very far along, and they now live on these sort of sentient beings as spaceships, but they kind of use up the life of those spaceship beings, and it's really about somebody coming to realize how problematic that is. It has such cool world building. I really like the style of it, but again, the body horror was just a little bit much for me. Now moving on to the books that I finished reading that were on my TBR. First is The Light Brigade by Kameron Hurley. This is a science fiction that really takes a look at the greed of corporations and the sort of never-ending issues of war. So in this future, basically the world has kind of deteriorated such that corporations are now in charge rather than governments, and they have very different priorities where it's all about money, and they end up using up people for these wars that they have between each other. We follow one of the grunts, like an infantry person, who is part of this and gets caught up in some malfunctioning light speed technology. So it's a really interesting exploration of the ideas of war and the ideas of corporate greed, and also of just sort of conforming. So it's a really cool story. The other book that was on my TBR that I finished was New Suns, edited by Nisi Shawl. This is a collection of speculative fiction by authors of color, and it has so many great stories. I really, really loved a bunch of these, although some of them didn't work for me. There's just such a range of stories within this. I think that as a collection of speculative fiction, it does such a great job in terms of having new voices and having interesting ideas and sort of pushing the envelope of what stories we tell and the styles that we use. I really got a lot out of this. So many of the stories worked for me, and there were lots of fascinating themes talking about all sorts of things, about heritage, about oppression, about colonization, about greed, about emotions about grief. It was just such a cool collection that I really, really enjoyed. Then, in addition to the books on my TBR, there were 2 books that I read that kind of fit the theme of recent releases in SFF that I wanted to talk about. First is Catfishing on CatNet by Naomi Kritzer. This is about a girl who keeps moving all of the time because she and her mom are trying to keep away from her dad, who is a really scary guy, and trying to find them. But all of this moving means that she doesn't have any real life friends. However, she does have a bunch of online friends on CatNet, which is an online community where they chat and share pictures of really cute animals. One of the members of this group, though, is not actually human. It's an AI. And that AI really ends up becoming friends and helping out when she needs it. So this is a super cute story. It's got a lot of interesting themes about AI personhood and about friendship. And it's also kind of a thriller because of this whole trying to escape her scary dad. The other new release that I read was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This is a Gothic horror set in the 1950s in Mexico. It follows Naomi, who is a socialite, really beautiful and brilliant, and very, very fashionable, who gets a letter from her cousin, who recently married and went up to live in a very remote kind of Victorian mansion with her kind of shady new husband. And this letter is very concerning. So Naomi goes to kind of check it out and see what's going on, only to find out that, yeah, this Victorian mansion is definitely creeping. So there is a lot going on in this story that is so cool. It's very slow and atmospheric. I loved the exploration of so many themes of kind of colonialism and power and greed and eugenics and gaslighting. There is so much in here that really, really worked for me. And it does get quite scary at the end for me. Okay, so now I want to talk about some of the themes that I noticed across these different books. The first theme that I really noticed was that of greed. There was so much in here about especially the greed of those who are in power and the way that their greed really negatively affects so many people. In the Light Brigade, this is really at the forefront because so much of the story is centered around these corporations and their greed and their desire for just power and money and influence, and how they're willing to just use up the lives of all of the people in order to get that. Similarly, in Middlegame, you have these alchemists who are totally willing to sacrifice the lives of these children and to do all of these things that are very, very shady in order to gain a lot of power. In Mexican Gothic, you have a whole family of people that Naomi's cousin had married into, who were British people who had come to Mexico in order to build silver mines. And there's so much there about the greed for silver and about the way that they used up the local working population in order to do that, as well as some other very shady things. In New Sons, there were quite a few different stories that talked about greed. One was the Galactic Tourist Industrial Complex by Tobias S. Bucknell, which is this sci-fi imagination of New York, where there are aliens who have come to Earth and who do tourist things. And there's so much here about the way that governments who decide that they want to have tourism as a way to get income sometimes really, really destroy the communities that actually live in their cities in order to get that foreign money. And this was a really biting look at the way that that can work. Also, The Fine Print by Chinelo Onwualu, which is about like a community, I think in Africa, where a magical being, kind of like a djinn, comes and is willing to grant wishes to everybody, but there is definitely a cost. Another thing that I noticed was that of gaslighting, this idea of trying to make people feel like they're insane for seeing that there is any problem. I definitely saw this in quite a few of them. In Light Brigade, there is something wrong with the light speed technology that is going on, and our main character is dealing with so many weird experiences because of that, and nobody is talking about it. Nobody is letting on that it's a thing, and it just makes them feel as if maybe they're kind of going insane. In Mexican Gothic, the whole thing is about gaslighting. You've got Naomi's cousin who is dealing with people thinking that she's basically going kind of crazy because she's talking about all of this weird stuff that's going on inside of the house. It is a really, really good exploration of that idea. Also, in Catfishing on CatNet, you have this, the dad, who's this really evil guy, and he is somebody who is excellent at social engineering and at all of these things of kind of getting people to believe him. And her mother has gone through this whole process of being gaslit while she was in a relationship with him, where everybody would think that she was making stuff up while they would all believe him. So that was definitely a theme in a lot of these stories. And the last theme that I noticed that I thought was really cool was that of empowering yourself. So really deciding that you deserve power and taking it. I loved this theme. So in the Light Brigade, this really, really holds true because our main character is just an infantry grunt who is just one little cog in a very big wheel. And they decide to take control and say, no, I'm stopping this. I'm getting out of this. And there's so much empowerment in that. Also in Mexican Gothic, you have Naomi, who is this woman who is discounted in so many different ways. And she refuses to be discounted. She refuses to be sidelined, to be gaslit, to be somebody who just falls in line with what these more powerful people want. I loved that. And you also in New Sons have quite a few stories that talked about that. In particular, I liked Burn the Ships by Alberto Yanez, which is all about this group of indigenous people who are completely oppressed by some colonizers. And in particular, you have the religious men who are the leaders of their community not deciding to stand up, and the women saying, no, we are going to stand up. Whatever the costs, we're going to stand up. And I love that empowerment of that. And also another story was The Virtue of the Unfaithful Translations by Min Soo Kang. This was excellent because it was such a subtle way of empowerment. In this, you have some different leaders of kind of warring cultures who are going to create a huge war, except that the translators actually decide to step in and mistranslate things to create some peace. And I thought that was such a cool version of empowerment. I really, really liked it. In addition to these themes, I wanted to mention the themes that I have noticed last year, since this priority was when I did then as well. So last year, the themes that I noticed were kind of ecological issues, and definitely that was still present in a lot of these. I think that especially in New Sons, there are quite a few that addressed that. In the Light Brigade, there's this whole deterioration of the world and people getting sick. And in Escaping Exodus as well, there's this whole, having to live on these animals that are spacefaring because you're no longer on your planet. There was also a big theme of AI personhood last year, which again, I saw in things like Catfishing on CatNet. And there was also just a big theme of diversity in SFF, which again, that was very much noticed, especially in New Sons, because that's the whole point of the collection. Okay, so now I wanted to go ahead and recommend my top 3 books from this priority month. The first is New Sons, edited by Nisi Shawl. I thought that this was such a great short story collection. Again, not every story worked in it, but so many of them did. And I think that whether a story works for you or not, it's going to be really personal. What I loved about this collection was just how creative it was. I thought that the stories were so inventive, and there was so many different voices, so many different worlds, so many different perspectives. So it's really worth picking up. The next one that I'd like to recommend is The Light Brigade by Kameron Hurley. I think that this one is just really good if you want something that is engrossing, that is excellent sci-fi, but also really excellent in terms of its anti-war and anti-capitalist messaging. And lastly, I'd like to recommend Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia, because this was just such a great book. It is a very slow one. It's very much a slow burn, and it's got this creepy atmosphere, but I think it works so well as a Gothic novel. It is just really thematically has so many different layers that I got so much out of. So if you're somebody who loves that creepy atmosphere and who loves feminist stories that take on some interesting issues, this is a great book to pick up. Okay, so that wraps up my July priority reading month. If you guys have read any of the books that I've mentioned, do you have any thoughts, any comments, any books that you've read recently that you really, really loved that are speculative fiction, anything at all, go ahead and leave me a comment down below. I would love to hear from you.